I never thought I'd be writing this, but after months of therapy and countless sleepless nights, I finally feel ready to get this off my chest. What I'm about to tell you might sound like something out of a movie, but I swear every word is true. Growing up, I was always the odd one out in my family. My older brother Daniel was the star athlete who could do no wrong, and my younger sister Emma was the artistic princess who got whatever she wanted. I was just there. The middle child who liked books more than sports, who preferred staying in my room building things rather than going to parties. My parents, Margaret and James, never really knew what to do with me. My dad runs a small auto repair shop and has these massive hands that can fix any engine but seem to struggle with showing any kind of affection to a kid who was more interested in electronics than carburetors. My mom works as a receptionist at a law firm and has always been obsessed with appearances and what the neighbors might think. The problems really started when I was in high school. Had gotten really into programming and had even started making some money building websites for local businesses. I was proud of this and thought my parents would be too, but instead, they seemed almost embarrassed by it. When relatives would ask what I was up to, my dad would say something like, "Oh, Timothy just plays around on the computer all day." My mom would add, "We keep telling him he needs to find a real hobby, but you know how kids are with their gadgets these days." It stung, but I told myself they just didn't understand technology. I figured once I got to college and started my computer science degree, they'd see that this was actually a legitimate career path. I was so wrong. College was the best 4 years of my life. I was surrounded by people who got excited about the same things I did. I joined the robotics club, participated in hackathons, and even did some freelance work that paid better than most part-time jobs my classmates had. I was making real money, saving up, and building a portfolio that would help me land a good job after graduation. Every time I came home for breaks, it was like stepping back into this alternate reality where my achievements meant nothing. During my sophomore year, I had won second place in a national programming competition and received a $5,000 prize. I was so excited to tell my family, but when I brought it up at dinner, Daniel just laughed and said, "Wow, Tim, you actually got paid to be a nerd." "That's adorable," Emma chimed in with, "Can you use that money to buy some cool clothes? Maybe then you'd actually look successful." My parents' reaction was somehow even worse. My dad said, "That's nice, son, but you know those computer contest things aren't really indicative of real-world success, right? It's like winning a video game tournament." My mom added, "We just want to make sure you're developing practical skills too. Maybe you should think about adding a business minor or something more substantial." I tried to explain that programming was substantial, that it was a growing field with incredible job prospects, but they would just give each other these looks like I was some naive kid who didn't understand how the world worked. The pattern continued throughout college. Every internship I got was dismissed as just playing around on computers. Every project I worked on was a nice hobby. Every bit of positive feedback from professors or employers was met with comments about how I shouldn't let it go to my head because the real world is different. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in computer science. My parents came to the ceremony. During the reception afterward, I was talking to one of my professors about a job offer I had received from a tech company in Seattle. It was an incredible opportunity with a starting salary of $75,000, which for a new graduate in 2019 was really good money. My professor was congratulating me and telling my parents how proud they should be, but I could see my dad getting that uncomfortable look he always got when people said positive things about my career. After the professor walked away, my dad pulled me aside and said, "Look, Timothy, I'm glad you're excited about this job offer, but you need to be realistic about what you're actually worth. 75,000 sounds like a lot, but don't forget that's before taxes and Seattle is expensive. You're probably going to be making about as much as a decent electrician, and they don't need 4 years of school for that." My mom joined the conversation and said, "Your father's right, honey. We just don't want you to get your hopes up too high. These tech companies are known for exaggerating their offers to attract young people, and then the reality is very different. Maybe you should consider looking for something more stable and local." I moved to Seattle anyway and started my job. It was everything I had hoped for and more. I was working on interesting projects, learning constantly, and yes, making good money. I found a nice apartment, made friends with my coworkers, and started dating a wonderful woman named Rachel who worked in marketing at a different tech company. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. I was surrounded by people who valued intelligence and creativity, who got excited about solving complex problems, who didn't think there was anything weird about spending your weekend working on a coding project because you found it fun. But whenever I talked to my family, it was like I was speaking a different language. I would tell them about the projects I was working on, and they would respond with comments like, "That sounds complicated," or "I'm sure you're learning a lot." When I mentioned getting a raise after my first year, bumping my salary up to $85,000, my brother Daniel said, "Wow, Tim, you're really buying into the whole tech bro thing, aren't you? Next you'll be telling us you're going to be a millionaire." The real breaking point came during Christmas of my second year in Seattle. Had been promoted to a senior developer position and was now making $95,000 a year. I had also started a small side business building custom software for small companies, which was bringing in an additional $15,000 to $20,000 annually. I was feeling confident and successful, and I made the mistake of sharing this with my family during Christmas dinner. We were all sitting around the table, and my Aunt Susan asked how work was going. I mentioned the promotion and said that things were going really well financially. That's when my dad decided to stage what I can only describe as an intervention. He put down his fork, looked at me seriously, and said, "Timothy, I think we need to have an honest conversation about your situation. Your mother and I have been talking and we're concerned that you're not being realistic about your life." I was confused and asked what he meant. My mom jumped in and said, "Honey, we love you, but we think you might be exaggerating your success to make yourself feel better. It's natural for young people to want to seem more successful than they are, but it's important to be honest with yourself and with us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told them I wasn't exaggerating anything, that I could show them my pay stubs if they wanted proof. Daniel laughed and said, "Tim, come on. You're 24 years old and you're claiming you make almost $100,000 a year playing on computers. Do you know how ridiculous that sounds?" I added, "It's like when we were kids and you used to tell everyone you were going to invent the next iPhone. It's sweet that you have big dreams, but you don't need to pretend they're already reality." The worst part was that they were doing this in front of extended family. My cousins, aunts, and uncles were all sitting there watching this happen. My Uncle Frank tried to change the subject, but my dad wasn't done. He said, "Look, son, there's nothing wrong with working in tech support or data entry or whatever it is you actually do, but calling yourself a senior developer and claiming you make more money than most people with 20 years of experience is just setting yourself up for disappointment." I tried to defend myself, but every word I said seemed to make them more convinced that I was delusional. When I mentioned my side business, my mom actually rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, Timothy, please don't tell me you're falling for one of those get-rich-quick schemes too." The whole dinner was ruined. I spent the rest of the evening sitting in my childhood bedroom, questioning everything about my life. These were the people who were supposed to know me best, supposed to support me, and they were convinced I was living in a fantasy world. Rachel, who had stayed in Seattle for the holidays, called me that night. I was so upset that I could barely speak. When I told her what had happened, she was shocked. She said, "Tim, that's not normal family behavior. That's actually really cruel and manipulative. You know your job is real, right? You know you're successful, right? Don't let them make you doubt yourself." But the damage was done. For months after that Christmas, I found myself second-guessing everything. When I got positive feedback at work, I wondered if they were just being nice. When I looked at my bank account, I wondered if I was somehow misunderstanding my financial situation. When colleagues talked about my skills and contributions, I wondered if they were just humoring me. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez, who helped me understand that what my family was doing had a name: gaslighting. She explained that they were systematically undermining my reality and making me question my own perceptions and experiences. She said it was a form of emotional abuse, even if they didn't realize they were doing it. Working with Dr. Martinez, I started to rebuild my confidence and set boundaries with my family. I stopped sharing details about my work and finances. I kept conversations light and superficial. When they made comments about my imaginary success, I would just change the subject or leave the room. This worked for a while, but it also meant that I was essentially living a double life. In Seattle, I was a successful software developer with a growing side business, a loving girlfriend, and a bright future. When I visited home, I was just Timothy, the weird middle child who played around on computers and had delusions of grandeur. Disconnect became even more apparent when Rachel and I got engaged. I was so happy and wanted to share this news with my family, but I was also dreading their reaction. Sure enough, when I called to tell them, my mom's first question was, "How are you going to afford a wedding, honey? Those tech jobs aren't as stable as they seem, and you don't want to start your marriage in debt." My dad added, "Make sure you're not biting off more than you can chew, son. Rachel seems like a nice girl, but she's probably used to a certain lifestyle working in marketing. You don't want to disappoint her when reality sets in." Even my engagement was being framed as evidence of my poor judgment and unrealistic expectations. Rachel and I had a beautiful wedding in Seattle. We kept it small and intimate, mostly our friends and her family. My family came, but they spent the whole time making comments about how expensive everything must be and how they hoped I knew what I was doing financially. During the reception, I overheard my Aunt Susan asking my mom about my job. My mom said, "Oh, Timothy works with computers. He's always been a bit of a dreamer, so he likes to make it sound more important than it is, but you know how kids are these days with technology." I was standing right there. It was my wedding day, and my own mother was telling relatives that I was basically a liar who exaggerated my job to make myself feel important. That was the moment I decided I was done trying to prove myself to them. I was done caring what they thought. I was done letting their opinion of me affect my self-worth. I was successful, I was happy, and I was tired of pretending otherwise to make them comfortable. Rachel and I settled into married life and it was wonderful. We bought a house, adopted a dog, and started talking about having kids. My side business had grown to the point where I was making almost as much from it as my day job. I was considering going full-time with my own company. I had minimal contact with my family during this period. I would call on birthdays and holidays, but I kept everything surface level. I didn't tell them about buying the house, about my business success, or about our plans for the future. As far as they knew, I was still the same delusional kid who worked in tech support and lived in a fantasy world. This distance was actually really healthy for me. Without their constant negativity and doubt, I was able to focus on my goals and achievements. I was sleeping better, feeling more confident, and my relationship with Rachel was stronger than ever. But then, last spring, everything changed. I got a call from Emma, which was unusual because we rarely talked directly. She was crying and said she needed to tell me something important. Apparently, my parents were in serious financial trouble. My dad's auto shop had been struggling for years, and the pandemic had nearly killed his business. He'd been living off credit cards and loans, hoping things would turn around, but instead they had just gotten deeper in debt. Emma told me they owed over $60,000 in various debts and were facing bankruptcy. The house they had lived in for 25 years was going into foreclosure. They were too proud to ask for help, but Emma said they were desperate. At the same time, Daniel was having his own crisis. He had gotten divorced and was paying substantial alimony and child support. He had been living with my parents to save money, but now that they were losing the house, he didn't know where he was going to go. Emma herself was struggling too. She had been working as a freelance graphic designer, but work had been inconsistent. She was behind on rent and was worried about being evicted from her apartment. She said the whole family was falling apart and she didn't know what to do. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Tim, I know you and Mom and Dad have had your differences, but you're the only one of us who's actually successful. Could you maybe help us out? We know you make good money with your computer job." I was stunned. After years of telling me I was delusional about my success, after years of making me feel like I was lying about my career and finances, they were now asking for my help because they finally acknowledged that I was, in fact, successful. I told Emma I needed time to think about it and that I would call her back. Then I sat in my office for hours, staring at my computer screen, trying to process what had just happened. Rachel found me there that evening and asked what was wrong. When I told her about Emma's call, she was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "What do you want to do?" I realized I didn't know. Part of me wanted to help because they were my family, and I did have the means to make a difference. But another part of me was furious that they were only acknowledging my success now that they needed something from me. I decided to call Dr. Martinez and schedule an emergency session. I needed to work through this with someone who understood the history and dynamics of my relationship with my family. Dr. Martinez listened to everything and then asked me a question that cut right to the heart of the matter. "Timothy, if you help them now, what message does that send about their behavior toward you over the years?" I thought about it and realized she was right. If I bailed them out now, I would essentially be rewarding them for years of emotional abuse and manipulation. I would be telling them that it was okay to treat me like I was worthless and delusional, as long as they could still use me when it was convenient. But I also knew that refusing to help would probably destroy any remaining relationship I had with my family. Emma, who had been the least cruel to me over the years, would probably never forgive me. My parents would probably never speak to me again. I talked it over with Rachel, and she said she would support whatever decision I made. She said she could see both sides of the situation, but she also reminded me of how much happier and healthier I had been since I had distanced myself from my family's negativity. After a week of agonizing over the decision, I called Emma back. I told her that I was sorry they were going through such a difficult time, but that I wouldn't be able to help them financially. I explained that their treatment of me over the years had been hurtful and damaging, and that I couldn't ignore that history just because they needed something from me now. Emma was devastated. She cried and said she didn't understand how I could be so selfish. She said that family was supposed to help family, no matter what had happened in the past. She said that my parents had made mistakes, but they were good people who were scared and desperate. I tried to explain that it wasn't about the money, that it was about the years of emotional abuse and the fact that they had never acknowledged or apologized for their behavior. Emma just kept saying that I was being cruel and vindictive, that I was using their desperation to get revenge for old hurts. The conversation ended with Emma hanging up on me, and I haven't heard from her since. A few days later, I got a call from Daniel. He was angry and aggressive, calling me selfish and heartless. He said that he had always known I was weird and antisocial, but he never thought I was actually cruel. He said that our parents had sacrificed everything to raise us, and that I owed them for that. When I tried to explain my perspective, Daniel cut me off and said, "You know what, Tim? You're right. You are successful. You're successful at being a cold, calculating asshole who cares more about his hurt feelings than his own family. Congratulations, you've really made something of yourself." Then my parents called. My mom was crying and saying she didn't understand how I could abandon them in their time of need. She said they had always been proud of me, even if they didn't always know how to show it. She said they had made mistakes, but that they loved me and thought I loved them too. My dad was more direct. He said he was disappointed in me and that he had raised me to be a better man than this. He said that successful people have a responsibility to help those who are struggling and that I was failing that responsibility. The manipulation was so obvious that it was almost laughable. After years of denying my success, they were now using that same success as a reason why I should help them. After years of making me feel worthless, they were now appealing to my sense of family loyalty and responsibility. But even though I could see through the manipulation, it still hurt. These were the people who had raised me, who I had spent my whole life trying to impress and please. Cutting them off felt like cutting off a part of myself. Guilt was overwhelming. I would lie awake at night thinking about my parents losing their house, about Daniel having nowhere to go, about Emma struggling to pay her rent. Even though I knew intellectually that their problems weren't my responsibility, emotionally I felt like I was abandoning them. Dr. Martinez helped me work through these feelings. She reminded me that guilt is often a tool that abusive people use to maintain control, even when you're trying to establish boundaries. She said that the fact that I felt guilty didn't mean I was doing the wrong thing. It just meant that I was a caring person who had been conditioned to prioritize other people's needs over my own well-being. She also pointed out that my family's financial crisis was the result of years of poor decisions and denial of reality. My dad had refused to adapt his business model to changing times. My parents had lived beyond their means and avoided dealing with their debt. Daniel had made choices that led to his divorce and financial instability. Emma had chosen an unstable career path without building up savings or developing backup plans. None of these problems were caused by me, and none of them would be solved by me giving them money. At best, my financial help would be a temporary band-aid that would allow them to avoid facing the real issues underlying their situation. 6 months have passed since those phone calls, and I still haven't had any contact with my immediate family. Through mutual friends and distant relatives, I've heard that my parents did lose their house and are now renting a small apartment. Daniel is living with a friend and working 2 part-time jobs. Emma moved back in with my parents to save money. I've also heard that they've been telling people their version of the story, painting me as the successful but heartless son who abandoned his family in their time of need. Some relatives have reached out to me expressing disappointment in my decision. Others have said they understand my position, even if they don't necessarily agree with it. The hardest part is that I genuinely don't know if I made the right choice. There are days when I feel confident that I did what I needed to do to protect my mental health and establish appropriate boundaries. There are other days when I feel like maybe I should have been the bigger person and helped them despite everything. What I do know is that I'm doing well. My business is thriving, my marriage is strong, and I'm happier and more confident than I've ever been. I've also maintained relationships with the family members who have always treated me with respect and kindness. Rachel and I are expecting our first child in a few months, and I'm excited about the prospect of being a father. I'm determined to create a family environment where my children feel supported and valued for who they are, not constantly criticized and undermined. I think about my parents sometimes and wonder if they'll ever meet their grandchild. I wonder if they've learned anything from this experience, or if they still think I'm the villain in this story. I wonder if there's a path to reconciliation that doesn't involve me compromising my boundaries or accepting their version of reality. But mostly, I try to focus on the present and the future. I've spent too many years of my life trying to earn the approval of people who seem determined not to give it. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life feeling guilty for finally choosing to prioritize my own well-being over their expectations. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good, but that doesn't mean it's not the right thing. Sometimes protecting yourself means disappointing other people, but that doesn't mean you're wrong to protect yourself. Sometimes family relationships are too toxic to maintain, even when it breaks your heart to let them go. I'm still in therapy, still working through the complex emotions that come with this decision. But I'm also building a life that makes me proud, surrounded by people who value and respect me, and maybe that's enough.